Hey guys, tonight's episode is about a flower, and no, not the cheap daisies your grandma plucks from a crack in the pavement. We're talking Tulip Mania, when a single tulip bulb sparked more chaos than a drunken pirate raid and made Dutch farmers wonder if they should wed their canal or their potato patch. Yes, the very bloom that once cost more than a canal-side mansion left families crying into turnip stew and had merchants wincing, "Next time I'll just stick to cheese." So stuff a blanket burrito in your face, crank your fan to maximum hum, and if you're new here, hit subscribe, but only if you genuinely like my content. And drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from. Picture 1633 in the Dutch Republic. A web of canals glinting like silver scars, windmills spinning overhead like giant wooden pinwheels on steroids, and banks bursting with enough minted coins to make Scrooge McDuck reconsider his life choices. The 80 Years' War wrapped up just 10 years ago, leaving Holland swollen with triumph and smug pride. Spices arrive from the East Indies, pepper that bites harder than your mother-in-law's gossip, cloves that reek of holiday cheer without the awkward family squabbles, cinnamon that hugs your tongue like an over-enthusiastic ant. Silk from Persia glides through busy ports, porcelain from China clinks on rolling carts, and furs from Russia drape noble shoulders like trophy mounts. Amsterdam's harbor looks like Santa's workshop on Black Friday. Meanwhile, scholars in Leiden bicker over theology like gladiators in a cerebral arena, debating if God prefers candlelight or, heaven forbid, the novelty of books, while tavern goers brag about nutmeg deals as though they've discovered elixirs of eternal life. But beneath this gilded layer of prosperity, a surprisingly petal-obsessed madness took root: the tulip. Not your run-of-the-mill orange or red tulip that farmers shove into gardens for centuries of head-turning color. No, we're after the rare, broken varieties. Their petals streaked with wild patterns of white, crimson, purple, and gold, looking as if a toddler threw temper tantrum paint across them. Botanists drooled like puppies, and merchants drooled like, well, drooling merchants, because in the 17th century, drooling often meant you were about to gamble your children's dowries on a root vegetable. Slide into February 1633, Amsterdam. Alas, no time machine. Use your imagination. You step off a rickety ferry onto a frostbitten dock. Ice shards crunch underfoot like soggy leaves in a haunted forest. The wind slaps your face mercilessly, whispering, "Welcome to misery, genius." You shuffle toward Dam Square. Ships lined along the canal glower like hulked-out monsters, their holds stuffed with pepper sacks and cinnamon crates. Sailors bellow orders to hoist crates, and each gust carries a cocktail of exotic scents, far more appealing than the local water, which doubles as a free lottery for dysentery. You slink into a cozy tavern, more akin to a subterranean cave with mood lighting from a handful of sputtering candles. Walls blackened by smoke press inward. Low ceilings hem you in like a coffin. A barrel of pickled fish sits in the corner, grinning at you with all the warmth of a corpse warning. Treintje, the innkeeper, stands behind a shabby bar, arms like twisted branches, and a glare suggesting she's seen more fools than fleas. She dumps a bowl of pottage, an anti-breakfast slurry of barley, turnips, and existential dread, onto your table. It tastes like someone blended soggy shoe leather with tears. You choke it down, chasing it with a slug of ale so foul it could raise the dead, and feel the cold sink into your bones. At the next table, two merchants lean in like conspirators auditioning for a low-budget spy flick. One hisses, "I heard a Semper Augustus went for 500 guilders." The other's jaw drops so far it nearly trips over his mug. 500 guilders. Are you using gold that you shoved up your nose? The first grins like a man who's lost all sense. You should have seen it, petals ablaze with white and crimson flames, like a phoenix riding a Valkyrie. If you saw that, you'd pay 1,000. They clink mugs as if toasting an apocalypse, while you gulp your ale and think, "I've seen cheaper doodads at market stalls, you loon." 10 blocks north, a posse of Leiden scholars, robes trailing frost, strolls along a frozen canal near the steeple of Oude Kerk. Clouds of steam puff from their mouths like malfunctioning smoke machines. They bicker over whether Christ's mustard seed parable was divine wisdom or early marketing for mustard farmers. Jan Van Meer, eternal baby-faced prodigy with more ribbons on his robe than sense in his head, pauses mid-argument to stare at a lone tulip bulb braving winter's bite. Its petals shimmer with crimson and gold, as if someone lit a secret bonfire. He cups it as reverently as a holy relic, murmuring, "It's like fire spun from silk." He scribbles in his journal, blissfully unaware that this fling with a flower will throttle the Dutch economy before spring. Fast forward to Haarlem, a half-day's schlep north. Cobblestones beneath your boots have enough character to make any historian weep. In the market, cheese wheels teeter like drunken acrobats. Blacksmiths hammer iron with the enthusiasm of personal vendettas, and the smell of freshly baked bread tangos with gin fumes and last night's regurgitated regrets. Beneath this bucolic buzz, a storm is brewing. Outside Haarlem, fields lie in neat rows under a frost-laden sky. Beneath that frozen earth, millions of tulip bulbs hibernate, dreaming of the day they'll flaunt fiery plumage. Among them, Hendrik de Boer kneels in a half-frozen furrow, his beard like a frosted beard of icicles. The wind howls a cruel aria, but Hendrik hardly notices. His eyes are locked on the bulb in his calloused hand. It's heavier than his hope, like a frozen marble of despair. He sniffs it, tasting a mix of damp soil and desperation. Marieke, his wife and lone sane voice in this symphony of madness, steps from their rickety hut. Her apron has seen better days, stained like battle flags from many winters. "Hendrik," she scolds, voice sharp as broken glass, "that bulb's worth more than our entire farm? Are you insane? Our turnips feed our children." He smooths a chunk of ice from his brow, grin spreading like a lunatic's as he exhales a frosty cloud. True, but imagine this. One broken bulb, 400 guilders, maybe 600. That's more than our farms ever birthed. Marieke's glare could curdle fresh milk. And what'll you do when the frost swallows it whole? Tulips don't bake bread, Hendrik. He hefts that precious bulb as though it's Excalibur. Ignore frost. Ignore famine. This is my ticket to grandeur. She sighs, the sound of resignation beneath winter's whip. Promise me you'll remember frost? He nods, already juggling fantasies of canal mansions and cheeses flung from gondolas, deaf to every sane caution, just as millions soon will be. Tulips weren't aliens to Europe. They arrived from Constantinople in the late 1500s and strutted around like minor celebrities. But suddenly, a new species took center stage, the broken tulip. Viral trickery in bulbs made their petals blaze with erratic streaks, like a warlock's brush dipped in chaos. To modern scientists, a mosaic virus. To 17th century romantics, Divine intervention. Petals with patterns so wild people whispered of gods painting their vengeance. In Amsterdam's coffee houses, cradles of rumor, not just caffeine, you find scribes flitting from table to table, hawking gossip like stray puppies. 20 Admiral van der Eyck bulbs just landed in Harlem. A shipment of Semper Augustus was hijacked by pirates off the Scheldt. Leiden's greenhouses rotting in dank basements. Patrons snap up these tidbits for pennies, as if they're contract gold. At one corner, a silken doublet-clad merchant named Cornelius counts gold coins like a nutty chipmunk. 5 Admiral contracts at 700 guilders each. A lean broker leans in, teeth hungrily bright. "Shut up, you fool. Sell before March or you'll be eating pottage for life." Cornelius's forehead gleams with sweat. Hype is a gluttonous beast, and he served it raw. Down by the canal in Depakuis, shipwrights gossip like cackling crows. Damp beams weep condensation, puddles glint underfoot, and echoes of whispered bids bounce off the crumbling brick walls. A silk importer shouts, "Last week I unloaded 3 Semper Augustus for 1,000 guilders each." General laughter ripples through the crowd. 1,000 guilders for a flower that dies in 10 days? The importer hoists a mug of piping coffee as if it's a chalice of victory. Better a withered bloom than a life of drudgery. Eyes gleam with that same ruthless hunger, greedy for the next bulb that might crown them kings of the canal. In Leiden's hottest haunt, Het Klaverblomke, dozens of lanterns flicker like jaded fireflies. Engraved tables bear maps of tulip fields, and former soldiers turned brokers spar over risk, like generals arguing battle plans. A grizzled veteran, Baron Smits, back hunched by scars, slides a sheet across the table. 3 Viceroy contracts at 275 guilders apiece. His wife, Elgie, shakes her head. "Our kids need shoes, not petals." He shrugs, eyes ablaze. "If these bloom, we'll be set." He treats speculation like sport. When you lose, you fall face first into a moat of regret. Rumors spread like plague through towns across Europe. A cloth merchant in Hungary tosses his entire nest egg into 10 Admiral bulbs, convinced he's found gold in the soil. In Paris, a minor noblewoman demands 5 Semper Augustus to decorate Versailles, because nothing shouts opulence like a bulb that costs more than your dowry. London's merchants devour Dutch newsletters as holy writ, wiring coin to Amsterdam brokers in hopes of snagging a bulb that guarantees eternal glory. Meanwhile, in Elburg, picture a village so quaint it looks painted. A widow named Cornelia van Riet places a lone, modest bulb in a cracked clay pot on her windowsill. She watches neighbors hawk livestock, looms, even floorboards for tulip speculation. "I'll plant you come spring," she whispers to her bulb, "and we'll survive on turnips and realism." She refuses to sign any contract thicker than her aunt's sermon book, choosing quiet defiance over manic folly. But back in Harlem's choked square, Hendrik de Boer's dozen brilliant bulbs, 12 miracles wrapped in straw, sit atop a makeshift podium. Brokers perch on fold-out benches, clipping petals with callous glee to verify pedigree. The clerk's voice, chillier than a tomb, announces, "First lot, 5 Semper Augustus, broken petals, certified." A hush falls like death, then bids ignite like wildfire. 300, 400, 500, 600 guilders. By noon, someone throws down 800 guilders on a single lot that bursts into bloom for 10 days and is dead by the next. Hendrik clutches gold coins like they're newborn kittens. He toasts in spirit to petals that promise canal mansions. That night, Trinch's tavern overflows with revelers. Raucous toasts to a petal economy, boasts of buying my spouse a yacht and selling this bloom for a duke's ransom. In a shadowy alcove, Leonora Bolt, a painter from Antwerp, sketches the madness unfolding. Hendrik's manic grin, the electric hunch of the crowd, Noble's doublets gleaming like tarnished armor. Under her sketch, she scrawls, "Welcome to the abyss. They worship a vase-bound fungus." That drawing sails to London, appears in pamphlets titled "Tulip Fever, the Madness of Men," and fans flames for fresh speculation. But in Leiden's greenhouses, tragedy strikes. A sudden frost, frozen daggers in a single night, snuffs out half the bulbs. By dawn, fields look charred, fragile hopes turn to dust. Couriers bolt through town shrieking, "Frost devours Harlem, tulips toast." Panic swells, prices rocket to absurd heights on rumor alone. Half are lost, buy now or be forever banished. Brokers rub greedy palms, salivating at the carnage. Farmers who mortgaged barns for canal estates weep in the bleak dawn. Peter van der Berg, who wagered his prize cow for a 900 guilder contract, staggers along a rutted lane dragging a chain of remorse. His cow is sold, his contract worthless. It's like selling your soul for vapor. In Amsterdam's richest canal district, cloth merchant Gerrit van Brakel hosts a private soiree in a parlor dressed like a velvet coffin. 5 jittery investors swirl wine as if conjuring spectral fortunes. Gerrit unveils a single Semper Augustus, its petals ablaze with white and red flames rippling like molten lava. "Last week this bulb fetched 1,000, he announces. "Tonight, start and bid 1,200. Who's brave?" A hush thicker than church hush falls. A retired admiral turned banker reluctantly fingers a quill and scratches his name on parchment. 1,200 guilders vanish from his pouch like falling leaves. Gerrit's wife, Dorothea, peeks from behind a crimson curtain, pale as spilled milk on doom. She sees them throw gold into the void again, hoping for bubbles in a bulb. She opens her mouth to protest, but finds only dread. For Gerrit, this night is a coronation of lunacy. This bulb is his crown, and he's king of absurdity. Below in the servants' quarters, 2 children slumber on tattered blankets. Their nurse, Truce, shoulders drooping like broken branches, tiptoes past. She spies a bulging purse of coins on a dusty desk, a contract pinned with a crimson ribbon, and a velvet box cradling a single tulip bulb. She shakes her head, recalling neighbors who perished chasing petals. In a quiet act of rebellion, she lifts the bulb and buries it beneath a tangled rose bush, hoping it blooms for beauty, not ruin. At Rotterdam's docks, the harbor master scowls at manifests listing tulip bulbs instead of pepper sacks and silk bolts. He mutters, "Why trade pepper for petals? Pepper warms your belly, tulips chill your soul." No one listens. The siren call of quick fortune drowns all logic. Captain Jan, who once hauled spices and herring, now ferries crates of bulbs. He glares at his hold stench, salted cod mingling with bulb rot, cursing the day-hype dethroned common sense. In The Hague, princely heirs lounge on cushions of velvet, sipping mead while gossip trickles through gilded halls. Cloth merchants bought canal estates last month on bulbs. A marquise from Paris sends an envoy demanding 2 Semper Augustus for her formal gardens, because nothing says "I rule the world" like a flower worth more than your dowry. The stadholder's council locks itself in a chamber of guilt and whispers, We must banish this trade. Families ruin themselves for petals. But they falter. Banning bulbs cuts off fat tax coffers. Commerce is king, vengeful, implacable, and so they do nothing. Spring 1634. Explosion of color across Dutch fields. Thousands of tulips blaze like living furnaces. For 2 glorious weeks, heaven unfurls its petals. Fields in Leiden, Haarlem, and Amsterdam become rainbow carpets traversed by awestruck pilgrims. A watercolorist named Willem van Rooyen sets up his easel, charging 3 guilders per sketch, and double if you demand a painted Semper Augustus tucked into your modest portrait. In Leiden's botanical garden, the famed Clusius variety glows beneath velvet ropes. 5 guilders buys entry to inhale its heady scent and pose for a souvenir sketch. I bonded with a bulb, they brag later. Professors promenade, lecturing on pigment anomalies and eyebrow-raising genetic quirks. Merchants sneak in, plotting how to flip next season's bulbs for fortunes. It's a carnival of vanity and folly, a festival of self-destruction dressed in velvet. Yet beneath this riot of grandeur, a storm gathers. North Holland farmers huddle in drafty barns, eyes hollow, watching fields blacken overnight as frost robs them of hope. They tremble, mortgages signed, futures mortgaged. In Hoofddorp, Cornelia, widow and lone sentinel of reason, tends her modest turnip patch and her single bulb buried against ruin's tide. Neighbors collapse, but she stands firm. Her bulb is her conviction, beauty without bankruptcy. In Alkmaar, cheese merchant Peter Clausen, blinded by greed, trades half a wheel of his prized Gouda for a viceroy contract at 400 guilders. He hauls stacks of cheese to market with a signed stern proclamation. 1 viceroy contract, 400 guilders. The clerk's stamp falls like a judge's gavel. Peter staggers home, dreams of fortunes crumbling as he faces tax collectors ready to seize his barrels of cheese. Now, into a Rotterdam courtroom so grim it doubles as a crypt. Rouvan de Witt, once proud skipper of 5 fishing smacks, stands shaking before a judge. In trembling hands, he holds a contract for 5 Admiral bulbs. His face, once ruddy with sea spray, is now ashen regret. I sold my ships to chase this miracle. Now I have nothing but rot. Across from him, Elias van Rijn, a broker once draped in opulent silks, hovers, eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. Your Honor, Elias squeaks, the contract demands payment regardless of bulb fate. The judge, perched on high like a perched hawk, narrows eyes behind steely spectacles. Did you store them in a damp cellar? Yes. The gavel falls. Buyer pays half. Seller covers remainder. Reuven sinks onto a bench, coins of shame cascading from his pockets. In The Hague's Grand Hall, the States General drafts the infamous Bulb Code. Dirk van Amstel, nobleman and amateur goblet craftsman, thunders, define rotten. Is it blackened, smashed, fungus-riddled? Countess Margaretha of Montfort, robed in sumptuous velvet, offers, buyers must inspect within 3 days of delivery, reimburse 50% if bulb fails a rigorous test. Debates spiral into chaos. Attic humidity limits, clay pot diameters, proper storage heights. They sign a parchment thicker than the combined wisdom of centuries, convinced that heavier legal tomes will ward off madness. Meanwhile, in Leiden, Hendrik de Boer and 5 neighbors break ground on a communal hothouse, a squat stone bunker with smoky iron stoves exhaling heat and grated floors to keep bulbs from drowning in damp soil. They've pooled every last penny for plain red and yellow bulbs, no frills, no viral patterns, just resilient species that survive winter's bite. Each night they huddle around steaming kettles of pottage, trading war stories. Place bulbs above the bricks. Label by variety, no midnight signing. If frost hits, at least we won't bury our debts. At dawn, they emerge bleary-eyed to see tender green sprouts pushing through the warm earth. Hope, fragile as lace. Back in Amsterdam's De Golden Lamp, the chalkboard that once flaunted bulb prices, Semper, 3,200, Viceroy, 2,500, Gaspar, 4,800, now sports a bold admonition. Weigh risks, trade wisely. Patrons sip coffee so dark it could qualify as punishment, tasting hints of regret and charred beans. Tobias the tailor, once a bullish speculator, pens pamphlets titled On Stability, Invest in Without Losing Your Hat. Leafy oak roots decorate his pamphlet covers, advice to anchor wealth in real ground, not ephemeral petals. Customers, former traders, apprentices, cheese vendors, huddle over these pages, whispering about irrational exuberance and budgeting basics. They swapped hype for humility. In Leiden University's lecture halls, Professor Magnus Donner rolls out a massive ledger on a polished oak table that gleams like a mirror in candlelight. Gathered around are students, merchants, and reformed brokers, eyes wide as he declares, "Welcome to the anatomy of mania. Why do sane men swap fishnets for bulbs?" He taps the ledger. January-February 1634. Admiral, 2,700 to 3,200 guilders. March-April. Admiral, 3,500 to 7,000 guilders. With chalk, he sketches a jagged curve on a soot-black board. First a rocket-fueled ascent of euphoria, then a heart-stopping dive into oblivion. Students scribble notes. Momentum trading. FOMO. Social contagion. They treat these as somber warnings rather than recipes for ruin. In Harlem Center, a memorial statue stands, a drooping tulip carved from stone, its petals sagging like exhausted hopes. A brass plaque reads, "In memory of those who traded petals for folly, may wisdom bloom from regret." Locals call it the broken bloom. Fishermen pause in their morning tasks, gloved hands resting on oars, heads bowed in silent tribute. Children hang ribbons from its stem, whispering prayers that sense will sprout where madness once flourished. Across the province, life stumbles toward normalcy. Rotterdam's docks, once loaded with bulb crates, now bustle with coffee sacks and molasses barrels. Peter Claassen, the cheese merchant who mortgaged his Gouda for a viceroy dream, reopens a humble stall. Wheels of cheese stack in neat pyramids, no flashy confections, just honest dairy that feeds families. His income trickles slowly, but it's a lifeline, not a fleeting fantasy. North Holland farmers band together, forging cooperatives that teach practical bulb cultivation. Hendrik de Boer's humble hothouse in Leiden becomes blueprint for solidarity. Stone walls, gentle stoves, straw-wrapped bulbs, and nightly counsel. Sell at fair prices, never sign contracts at the dead of night. Their harvest of modest red and yellow bulbs brings in 3 guilders apiece, barely enough to cover taxes and shoes for kids, but enough to dodge the abyss. Courtrooms once echoing with bitter tears now hum with revised bulb ordinances. Judges enforce partial refunds for rot, require prompt inspections, and mandate broker bonds posted in public coffee houses, proof they won't vanish when frost bites. Contracts slim to manageable scrolls, each clause a cautionary note. So when whispers of a new craze arise, villagers thumb through these ledgers and recall 1634's collapse, shields forged from collective memory. In Leiden's grand lecture halls, Professor Donner adds commodity ethics to his curriculum. Students debate momentum and FOMO as though deciphering ancient riddles. They sketch bulb price graphs, euphoria's rocket, panic's plummet, and design plans for a sturdier republic, one built on reason, not petals. And in Amsterdam's De Gulden lamp, that once hyped chalkboard now warns in bold, weigh risks, trade wisely. Beans brew strong enough to stain the soul, and patrons swap tales of cautious ventures, grain shipments, spice caravans, honest returns. The air still buzzes with coffee's bite, but now tempered by lessons scarred into memory. Holland's path from mania to methodical recovery wasn't swift. It was slow, stubborn, and stitched together by practical defiance. Farmers tilting spades in rye fields, widows nurturing bulbs in fire-warmed barns, core communities forging resilient dances with risk. This battered republic learned that true wealth sprouts from solid roots, bread, bricks, and sweat, rather than fleeting petals. It bears repeating like a coffeehouse sermon. The road from mania's pinched-cheek delusions to pragmatism's gruff grimace was strewn with shattered dreams, burnt greenhouses, broken marriages, and more than one fistfight erupting over a single bulb. After the frost sank its icy fangs into 1634, the countryside lay littered with glass shards from collapsed hothouses, remnants of hope turned to frozen regret. Picture a winter so savage that even the fleas on orphaned puppies begged for mercy. Their pitiful howls echoed the last gasp of tulip greed, each bark a frozen lament for fortunes gone up in icicles. In Leiden, the aftermath resembled a bacchanal pitched from a drunken church sermon. The elegant hothouses, those cathedral-like structures of glass and ambition, lay crumpled like abandoned dreams. Landscape once painted in delicate petals now sprawled in jagged shards, glass glinting like tears on the snow. Entrepreneurial sausage vendors, ever the opportunists, tried to repurpose the broken glass to roof their carts. Market guards chased them off with curses ripe with smoked herring and moral outrage. You can't sell soggy sausages under a canopy of shattered delusions. And so the vendors sulked, heaping their sausages onto barrels, lamenting both the rain and the ruin of a good speculative bubble. Meanwhile, in Delft, the town's resident curmudgeon, Drickus Klomp, prowled the fringes of the ruins with the grin of someone who'd never had a petal fall right in his soup. The moment any passerby dared to utter bulb, he rose from his bench like a necromancer of doom. Bulb here, bulb there, bulb in your ear, he hollered into a chipped mug of thin ale. When a group of wide-eyed students approached, ink-stained parchments in hand, brimming with half-baked investment schemes, Dricus pointed a bony finger at them. Mark my words, when the ice thaws, your pockets will be emptier than your prayers. The students scattered like terrified pigeons, clutching their contracts as though they might sprout tulips to salvage their reputations. Not everyone, however, wallowed in bitter regret. In Lisse, a village once celebrated for its cascading fields of flamboyant tulips, Hendrik van Santen, a former bulb speculator, had charred his fingers so badly that he no longer fancied playing with fire. Where he once scribbled ledger entries for Semper Augustus bulbs, he now wielded a plow like a ceremonial sword, turning soil rather than fortunes. At the village meeting, Hendrik, his shoulders stooped under the weight of regrets, declared, If a bulb can cost me my daughter's dowry, then by Saint Bavo I'm planting beets, rye, and potatoes. None of this colored folly. Some in the crowd laughed, imagining Hendrik's daughters trouncing in turnip patches rather than bridal gowns. Others cheered, raising their clay cups in solidarity. A few frowned, noting that Hendrik's grin was brittle as frozen peat, but the spirit of resilience took root among them. That resilience, stubborn as barnacles clinging to ship hulls, manifested in every corner of the Republic. From the fog-choked docks of Rotterdam, where cranes still lifted crates of spices rather than bloom contracts, to the windmill-laced horizons of North Holland, where farmers reopened fields once leased to bulbs but now dedicated to sustenance. Even in the canals of Amsterdam, gondoliers traded bulb tales for fish stories, their nets hauling herring instead of hopes. In Alkmaar, the cheese capital, the local dairy guild's membership swelled with refugees from bulb-blessed careers. Women who once mastered the delicate art of carving Semper Augustus petals now learn to shape the curds of Gouda with the same precision. If you can sell a promise for 2,000 guilders, sneered master cheesemaker Dirk van Leyden during apprenticeship, then you can certainly slice this curd with finesse. Apprentices nodded, carving wheels of cheese with grim determination. Each wedge sold carried not just tangy flavor, but a silent promise. In this kingdom of cheese, the only bubble worth fearing was the one in your butter churn. Elsewhere, small-town councils huddled in smoky taverns to decide the fate of their shattered economies. In Haarlem, the grand table in the old city hall groaned beneath stacks of maps, proposals, and grim-faced councilors. Mayor Gerrit Blau presided, his powdered wig askew from nights spent tossing in bed, haunted by figures dancing like maddened petals. "We need work, not wagers," he rumbled, punctuating each word with a flick of his fattened finger. Councillor Van Ryder, known for his crusty demeanor and stubble sharper than a quill, countered, "And what work, Gerrit? The fields are frozen. The fish are scarce. Our mills creak like dying kings." Voices rose, chiming like broken bells. In a moment of dramatic tension worthy of a stage, old Margaret Verbeek, who'd lost her cottage to bulb debt, slammed her wooden spoon on the table. "Feed us, don't fatten us on false hope. Build us dikes, restore our roads, fire up our forges. Rebuild with hands, not hearts drunk on petals." Silence fell, as if her words had shattered illusion. From that crucible, a plan emerged. Communal projects to repair dikes and dig canals, employing lost craftsmen, displaced laborers, and widows' sons. Across the provinces, cooperatives sprouted, alliances not of merchants and speculators, but of farmers, fishers, artisans, and bakers. In Alkmaar, the Cheese and Carpentry Association formed to mend homes stripped of hearths during the mania's wake. When a farmer's barn roof collapsed under spring rains, a troop of carpenters, paid in barrels of cheese, hammered timbers with breezy curses. The homeowner nodded through tears. "May your cheese never stink and your nails never bend." Carpenters laughed, not at the household, but at the absurdity that cheese now funded carpentry, rather than contracts funding cheese. Each beam they raised symbolized solidarity, a structure built not on speculation, but on shared labor and real needs. Pamphleteers and scribes turned Tulip Mania's carnage into literature flavored with bawdy wit. One noted pamphlet, Tulip Tempest, authored by Janus Hedema, portrayed a surreal Professor Petalpeak lecturing on tulip economics from an ivory tower. arguing that a tulip's worth was directly proportional to gullibility. Students of finance would recite Petal Peak's absurd petal velocity ratios with comic reverence, but discreetly nodded at the sobering lesson. Sugar-coated promises can taste as bitter as a rotten bulb at dawn. At Leiden's universities, theologians and philosophers gathered in candlelit halls, debating whether Tulip Mania was divine punishment for vanity. Pastor Harmon de Vries boomed from his pulpit daily. "We knelt before a flower, not our Lord. Look upon your rosaries and ask, what is gained when wealth lacks wisdom?" Parishioners shuffled out with furrowed brows and lighter pockets, having invested both in tithes and conscience. Yet, as sermons swirled, farmers whispered among themselves, "What good is piety if our children's bellies remain empty?" It took the harsh voice of necessity to remind them that faith alone wouldn't fill bellies. In Gouda, known as much for its cheese as its ceramics, artisans exchanged stories of bulb-fueled heartbreak over mugs of hot-spiced wine. Helena van Staal, once a celebrated potter, sculpted modest jugs etched with petals beneath crossed bones, a macabre memento mori of Tulip Mania. Each jug, sold for a handful of pennies, became a prized talisman, a reminder that beauty without utility is a vessel destined to crack. Helena carved a token inscription on each base: "Memento bulbus, remember the bulb." Travelers carried the jugs as cautionary souvenirs, their surfaces pocked with the dents of commerce and regret. In Utrecht, cathedral bells tolled not only Sundays, but the anniversary of the tulip crash, a day of reflection on financial caution. Residents gathered in the square, children perched on parents' shoulders, to watch a theatrical reenactment of 1637. Actors draped in exaggerated ruffled collars and gilded spades pantomimed frantic trading, ending in a chorus bellowing, "All is vanity and a chase after the wind." The crowd, unsure whether to laugh or weep, cheered. Vendors hawked pastry tulips, crispy dough petals dusted with sugar. Consuming one became a communal ritual, a crunchy parody of prized bulbs, reminding all that the sweetest part of a tulip was its bloom, not its price. In border towns along the Rhine, German traders whispered legends of bulb smugglers who seized Semper Augustus bulbs, slipping them across customs to plant clandestine gardens. One notorious rumor told of Heinrich Blauhut, a baron hoarding a solitary Semper Augustus bulb in an iron chest, warming it with stolen hearth embers during midnight rituals. Rumor held that neighbors heard him murmuring to the bulb, "Grow and haunt their dreams, as I've haunted mine." When a vintner offered him a crate of mead for the bulb's hiding place, Blauhut hurled the mead into the Rhine, shouting, "My fortune sells for no drink. Let my bulb meet earth, not feast." He vanished into the Black Forest, leaving footprints and wild tales. The Dutch Navy, too, reeled from Tulip Mania's aftershocks. Midshipmen of the East India Company once filled their pockets with bulb contracts instead of navigational charts. Captain Peter Van Alden, his patience tested by bulb-obsessed sailors, barked, "By Neptune's beard, chart a proper course rather than chart your fortunes on petals." Under his command, crews replaced bulb-fueled speculation with pragmatic seamanship, charting spice routes, securing cargo holds, and battling pirates rather than kneeling before tulips. Yet, despite their captain's scorn, sailors still sang sea shanties of Holland's broken bloom, each verse reminding them that a sailor's coin is best spent on rum, not rooted in petals. In Leiden's botanical gardens, women botanists like Elise van Harmelen refused to let mania smother the science of tulips. She and colleagues pressed on with sober research, breeding hardy, frost-resistant strains that fed families rather than bankrolled folly. Her lab notes brimmed with wry observations. Petals admired by fools, leaves cherished by the practical. Under her watchful eye, tulips were no longer categorized by fanciful names, but by pragmatism. Rating: survive frost, feed rabbit, yield dye. Humor dyed her scientific prose, reminding readers that beneath each petal lay a pulse of practicality. In Egmont and Z, fishing families, bitter survivors of tulip-fueled losses, took to beachcombing washed-up bulbs, once prized curios. They lashed these worthless bulbs to their nets as talismans, quipping, "Let these bulbs bring our nets luck, if not coin." Fishermen reported record catches, attributing success to humor-fueled superstition. Soon, tulip talismans became seaside novelties, cheap souvenirs sold to gawking travelers who laughed at the bulb's symbolic impotence. As decades trudged on, the Dutch Republic's psyche evolved from tulip-tinted mania to a cultural skepticism of extravagant fancies. Coffee houses once swarming with bulb brokers now buzzed with merchants trading coffee beans, cocoa, and news of distant skirmishes. The click-clack of abacuses replaced the frantic scribbles of bulb contracts. In Harlem, coffeehouse owner Lawrence Coaster hung a faded bulb contract in a dusty frame above his counter inscribed, "Office of Disillusion, free coffee for realists." Patrons sipped dark brew, exchanging knowing glances, murmuring, "Let the bloom we cherish be this bean in our mug." In the national consciousness, tulips retained a sliver of allure, admired for their riotous color, but stripped of monstrous price tags. French and English merchants, unaware of tulip mania's sobering legacy, brought rare bulbs as diplomatic gifts. In Versailles, a visiting Dutch envoy presented a Semper Augustus bulb to a French marquis, trumpeting its pedigree. The marquis sniffed, smirked, and tisked. Such bloom was once said to command fortunes. Now I treat it as a trinket, like a pretty lie. True wealth sits not in soil, but in wit, wisdom, and wine. And the bulb's value fizzled under aristocratic indifference. Within European finance treatises, the broken bloom became canonical. Professors in Paris lectured on the Mississippi and South Sea bubbles, always sliding in a cautionary frame titled, "That Flower-Powered Farce from Holland." Students chuckled at illustrations of hapless merchants delivering bulbs instead of gold, but the lesson seeped in. Any asset untethered from tangible value is destined for collapse. By century's end, cultural memory cemented tulip mania's scars into literature and art. Poet Susanna van der Velden penned scathing verses, "O bloom of powdered hue, false beacon bright yet cruel. Our coin dissolved like dew, our folly made the fool." Her words blazed across coffeehouse walls. Patrons recited refrains over mugs of dark brew, their laughter edged with rue. Painters' toes whispering, "Beauty unmoored from utility is a specter that devours the living." Generations later, tulip mania's resonance persisted in household heirlooms. In many families, one chipped teacup bearing a faded tulip motif was passed down, carried across oceans to New Amsterdam, or stashed in attics in Groningen. Each cup bore an unspoken admonition: sip mindfully, lest you taste regret. In New Amsterdam, soon to become New York, Dutch colonists taught settlers of tulip mania, urging them to favor fertile soil and honest toil over exotic dreams. Early settlers, recalling the Dutch folly, speculated on land sensibly, timber, fur, grain, eschewing get-rich-quick hopes. Schools updated curricula to incorporate Tulip Mania's lessons. Children studied annotated versions of Tulip Tempest and Memento Bulbus, analyzing arithmetic not to compute inflation, but to calculate yield, bushels of grain per acre, not guilders per petal. Poets' anthologies featured quips once bandied in coffee houses. If our pockets freeze like bulbs in winter, at least let our wit stay warm. Through these lessons, wisdom endured, even as folly receded. Agriculturally, the legacy spurred diversification. Farmers who'd cleared acres for tulip monocultures now planted flax for linen, hops for beer, and tobacco for export. Workshops taught crop rotation with clover, fertilization using seaweed, and irrigation techniques once ignored. Fields once buried under bulbs transformed into laboratories of innovation. Test plots of mangold, barley, and cabbages bore witness to pragmatism born of pain. Scribes credited Tulip Mania as the crucible that forged agricultural evolution in Holland. Mercantile guilds adopted new ethical codes. Captains and traders signed pledges. I vow not to engage in frivolous futures nor sell promises of petals. These pledges hung beside the scales of justice in guild halls. When a young Rotterdam trader gambled on Baltic cedar and lost, peers reminded him, "We do not bet on bark, nor petals, nor men's foolish hearts," fining him, the proceeds of which fended orphans. Community enforced moral lessons through penalty and charity alike. As Tulip Mania's wails faded from living memory, its influence seeped across Europe. English dramatists modeled tragedies on Dutch drama. Lady Tulipia, a noblewoman, obsessed over rare bulbs to her ruin. Actors on stages draped in silk gowns patterned with wilted petals collapsed clutching broken bulbs, and audiences roared with a mixture of laughter and tears, recognizing tragedies not distant but looming if history repeated. Salon philosophers in Paris, like Blaise Descartes, cited the Dutch folly. When senses deceive, let pockets not bleed. In aristocratic salons, Memento Bulbus excerpts, "All that glitters is bulb until it crumbles to dust," floated alongside critiques of rationalism. Churches across Germany held sermons on the folly as divine caution. Lutheran pastors warned congregations, "Avoid tulip temptations of greed, for the Lord's field is fertile enough." German farmers formed seed banks to stave off famine, vowing, "Better a barren bulb than a burdened belly," solidifying solidarity in lean years. Back in Holland, philanthropic currents emerged. Wealthy merchants, once enriched and impoverished by Tulip Mania, funneled resources into hospitals, orphanages, and poor farms. In Leiden, widow Catharina van Leyden, having lost her dowry to bulb speculation, founded a small infirmary for destitute families. She insisted that admission required no proof of wealth, only evidence of having been oversold by petals. Her infirmary, Villa Bulbus, became both clinic and cautionary monument, its halls echoing gratitude and reflection. Visitors often paused before a bulb-shaped relief carving by the entrance, a silent homage to folly and compassion alike. By 1700, what had begun as a fever dream of inflated petals had woven itself into a tapestry of culture, caution, and community. The broken bloom's legacy flowed into art, literature, education, religion, philanthropy, agriculture, and governance. Its lessons shaped a generation's approach to value, economic, moral, and aesthetic. instilling a wariness of speculation and a reverence for tangible labor and honest living. Yet, even as Tulip Mania slid into dusty memory, its ghostly presence lingered in subtle ways. A tulip motif on a teacup might prompt a nod to prudence. A soldier's helmet bore a carved tulip petal to remind him of home's stability. A merchant's ledger once included a wry margin note. Value measured in bread and salt, not petals. In clock towers chiming in Ghent, market stalls in Breda, and ship's logs of the Dutch East India Company, a quiet reverence bubbled beneath. Never forget frost. Several centuries later, coffee houses gave way to internet cafes, but human folly remained unchanged. In 1999, dot-com fever gripped investors like a rabid kennel of manic cats. Websites sprouted like mushrooms after rain. Every dot-com domain spelled instant glamour. Pets.com, the talking sock puppet that barked its way to bankruptcy, gobbled millions in venture capital before vanishing. In Silicon Valley boardrooms, executives preached that any .com suffix guaranteed a one-way ticket to the moon. IPOs launched on hype alone. No profits? No problem. Volunteers lined up for stocks rather than hot dogs, convinced that eyeballs equaled earnings. And when the bubble burst in March 2000, websites crashed, executives vanished, and server rooms fell silent, survivors cried, "Tulip 2.0," as they watched portfolios evaporate faster than dew in April. In 2008, housing mania unfolded with subprime mortgages, collateralized debt obligations, and credit default swaps. Banks, in their infinite wisdom, bundled bad loans like carnival barkers mixing salt and sugar. Wall Street traders, perched atop piles of leveraged derivatives, chanted infinite upside, ignoring whispers of tulips, meet frost, echoing from faded Dutch treatises. Brokers sold 30-year mortgages to any Tom, Dick, or Harriet with a social security number, no questions asked. Interest-only loans glistened like Semper Augustus bulbs, coveted, overpriced, and ultimately worthless. When the music stopped, the global economy shuddered. Houses foreclosed overnight, credit markets seized like rusted gears, and millions found their names mired in underwater debt. Governments scrambled with bailouts, throwing trillions into financial black holes while grumbling about moral hazard. Street protests sprang up. Bankers got their bonuses, we got broken mortgages. In 2008, as homeowners discovered that investing in a tulip in 1637 would have been wiser, the specter of frost returned. By 2021, cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Dogecoin, and a parade of altcoins became the modern Semper Augustus. Traders posted memes like altarpieces, worshiping code instead of church. HODL and diamond hands became mantras in Reddit forums, convinced digital coins offered DeFi liberation. NFT art, JPEGs sold for millions, defied logic. Pixelated monkey avatars fetched more cash than the artist's studio rent. Crypto exchanges rose and fell in a single tweet, while YouTube influencers hawked new tokens promising 1,000x gains. By early 2022, when Terra/Luna imploded and FTX's lights went dark, investors found themselves clutching worthless private keys, proving once more that decentralized meant not immune to collective hysteria. In spring 2021, meme stocks, GameStop, AMC, BlackBerry, commanded headlines as retail armies rallied on platforms like Reddit's Wall Street Bets. Fueled by outrage at hedge funds shorting struggling retailers, amateur day traders turned mobile app screens into battlefield maps. To the moon, they screamed, bidding GameStop shares skyward from single digits to nearly $500 in weeks. Then, as quickly as euphoria rose, values tumbled. Margin calls, liquidations, and exploitative trading halted screens. Yet the communal thrill lingered, proof that collective delirium inflates prices as swiftly as frost shatters bulbs. Simultaneously, SPACs, special purpose acquisition companies, ramped across IPO markets from 2020 through 2022. White label blank check vehicles raised billions, promising to merge with mysterious private companies. From electric vehicle startups to biotechs claiming miracle cures, SPACs roared and then gasped. By early 2023, regulatory oversight tightened. Many SPAC deals folded like soggy soufflés. Founders of delisted SPACs slinked away, clutching blank checks once swollen with hype. Analysts sardonically noted, SPAC mania, the tulips of the 21st century. As the world tiptoed into 2020 and 2021, housing markets experienced another manic spike. Lockdowns drove demand for suburban homes. Remote work uncovered a fervent chase for space, even if it meant acquiring a fixer-upper in the middle of nowhere. Mortgage rates touched historic lows, banks printed just qualify loans, and bidding wars erupted over listings with shag carpets and leaky roofs. Realtors touted digital open houses, while buyers offered all-cash bids, sight unseen, convinced prices could only climb. By mid-2021, home values in many U.S. metro areas had soared 30 to 50%. But as interest rates drifted upward in 2022 and 2023, affordability collapsed. Buyers who gulped exotic mortgage products found themselves paying higher monthly notes than expected. Property flippers, once banking on quick resales, held unsaleable assets. Foreclosures ticked up by early 2024 as adjustable rate mortgages reset at gouging levels. In Florida and California, for sale signs multiplied like dandelions, while hopeful sellers discovered equity had evaporated faster than morning mist. Green energy in the late 2010s and early 2020s bred its own speculations. Solar and wind startups, celebrated as saviors of Earth, gobbled billions in venture capital, even before turbines spun or rooftop arrays installed. Battery companies touted next-gen solid-state and graphene breakthroughs, drawing hype measured in multiples of downstream profits. Government subsidies poured in. Environmentalists cheered skyrocketing stock prices for green energy firms. By 2024, cracks emerged. Many solar startups failed due to cost overruns. Wind turbine projects stalled amid supply chain snarls and community opposition. Battery firms touted revolutionary chemistry, but repeatedly missed production targets. Carbon credit markets, once heralded as a panacea, imploded under double-counting scandals. Projects turned out to be statistical illusions, planting trees that died within a year or permitting polluters to game the system. Critics muttered, "Tulip Mania, meet greenhouse gas," as carbon credits dropped 60% in value. Around 2021 and into 2022, NFTs, non-fungible tokens, burst onto the scene. CryptoPunk pixel art sold for $10 million. Virtual real estate in metaverse platforms exchanged hands for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Celebrities and VC firms snapped up metaverse parcels, convinced digital scarcity equated to lasting value. Fashion labels minted digital sneakers and handbags, some fetching triple-digit Ethereum sums, while older generations asked, "I can't wear that IRL." By late 2022, many NFT projects lost secondhand buyers. Creators burned tokens theatrically, an ode to ashes swirling in secondhand marketplaces. Virtual land values cratered as users realized there was no real foot traffic in digital malls devoid of real-world attractions. The phrase "digital petal" circulated. Do you feel the beauty or the emptiness? Code fragments, once status symbols, became blockchain dust. As these modern bubbles popped, academia and regulators scrambled to codify lessons. Business schools added Tulip Mania 101 modules to finance courses, supplemented by .com 2.0, the graph of eternal frost. Financial journals analyzed correlations between social media sentiment and asset price spikes, citing parallels to 17th century Holland. Indian regulators revamped rules for crypto trading to prevent asset gambles unconstrained by fundamentals. The US SEC published bulletins. Beware of tokenized tulips. Remember glass petals break hearts. In Europe, MiCA, Markets in Crypto Assets regulation, took effect in 2023, aiming to rein in unregulated tokens, requiring disclosures reminiscent of Janus Hedema's pamphlets. In Tokyo stock exchanges, a wry banner read, "Land is not a petal, roots matter." Yet street-level traders laughed, betting heavily on pre-IPO startups, convinced this time it's different. They'd heard that before. Singapore invested billions into blockchain infrastructure under slogans like "Smart Nation," "Smart Assets," while exposed retail investors nervously watched holographic tickers flashing peeled-back bubbles. Let's not forget the personal toll. In 2021's crypto crash, students who mortgaged apartments for Bitcoin now hustled cafes as baristas, explaining to skeptical customers, "Yes, I had 10 Bitcoin, but I sold at $30,000 instead of $60,000 because I panicked." In 2008, teachers lost retirement savings in mortgage-backed securities. They returned to classrooms teaching budgeting rather than equating success with portfolio size. Dutch villagers who suffered 1637's ripple effects taught offspring to sow flax, barley, and beans rather than bulbs, knowing roots feed bellies, petals only briefly entice. Yet amidst each collapse, glimmers of resilience appear. Regulators refine policies. Educators teach financial literacy earlier. Cooperatives form to pool risk. Technology evolves to cushion, but not eliminate exposure. In Post.com San Jose, co-working spaces rose to replace shuttered startups. Entrepreneurs pivoted from ad clicks to tangible products: solar panels, medical devices, organic coffee. In 2010's housing bust, community land trusts provided affordable housing. Municipalities implemented transparent lending guidelines to protect first-time buyers. Blockchain architects propose proof-of-value protocols, requiring startups to demonstrate actual revenue before token launches. Civic networks encourage participatory budgeting rather than speculative projects. Crowdfunding platforms like Kickstarter emphasize product prototypes rather than abstract promises. Lenders require realistic cash flow plans rather than inflated projections. Through it all, the broken bloom spirit persists, a whisper in the din of digital ticker tapes, a footnote in doctoral theses, a reminder in every mediated frenzy. It reminds us that value not rooted in utility wilts as surely as a tulip in January. History's twisted humor lies in this. Humans are gifted at innovation, yet cursed by the seductive lure of quick riches. As you pour your morning coffee, bitter, hot, and grounded in beans rather than promise, Ask yourself, what am I holding? A jolt of caffeine or a cautionary artifact reminding me that petals, whether sold in trade houses or decentralized ledgers, can vanish at dawn's first frost. When you check your stock app for the latest crypto ticker, remember Dracus Klomp's warning. Bulb here, bulb there, bulb in your ear. When all the petals fall, you'll wish for normalcy. If you followed this journey from frostbitten fields of 17th century Holland through glass shards, broken hothouses, cheese-funded carpentry, dot-com dust, housing wreckage, crypto carnage, SPAC shams, and NFT ghosts, congratulations. You've learned more than a few lessons the hard way. You've seen that every generation's folly is someone else's lesson, at least until the bubble bursts. Holland's legacy teaches that true wealth sprouts from things that endure: cooperation, solidarity, diversified livelihoods, and a healthy dose of skepticism before chasing glitter. Whether you're a farmer tilting a spade, a coder drafting smart contracts, a teacher shaping young minds, or an investor eyeing tomorrow's shiny new thing, think twice before bidding your life's work on petals alone. If you found this story enlightening, consider subscribing for more deep dives into history's most infamous follies. Rest well and good night.